My name is Sara Potecha. I'm a graduate in 1983. I then served as an ordnance officer for about 6 years in Europe and then in Kansas. And then I got out and went into corporate America and have done that for several years and eventually got into organizational development, leadership development, then started my own company, recently published a book called West Point Woman. And it really is the story of being one of the first women at West Point and the leadership lessons you learn as a result of that. And I currently, I married a classmate. He did pass away. And then about 6 years ago, I met my current husband. And I always give him a bit of a hard time that I married him even though he was Navy. I know. But between us, we have 6 grown children. And right now, 3.5 grandchildren, because one is going to be born at the end of April. So kind of an exciting time in our lives, and an author and speaker. And so delighted to have you here. I'm going to have each of our panelists, and we're talking about the subject of resilience, which is a huge topic. And I'm really excited about the people that have agreed to be part of this webinar. They have just incredible backgrounds and a different perspective, each of them, on the idea of resilience. So I thought I would initially have Bonnie start and kind of introduce herself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Bonnie Wood. When I was at West Point, my name was Bonnie Blanchard. I was class of 1991. I branched engineers and served about 8 years active and another 4-ish years Guard and Reserve in the engineer branch. And I married a classmate who I've since divorced after about 20 years of marriage. I'm remarried now to a non-military person who has no, affiliation or understanding really of military. I'm currently living in Colorado Springs, which is really interesting because my first duty station was supposed to be Fort Carson, and it all got changed because of that first husband that I married out of West Point. We had to reshift our posts to Fort Stewart, Georgia. But anyways, I'm glad to be here in Colorado. I'm now working as a social worker. So midway after several years of raising kids and being a stay-at-home mom, I kind of really became interested in the service helping profession. And so I got my social work, my master's in social work, and I'm a licensed social worker and working with people with disabilities, specifically persistent and long-term mental illness right now. And I feel like I have have seen a lot of good examples of resilience in my social work career that might be interesting to this panelist. So thank you for having me.
Yes. Brittany.
Oh. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brittany Simmons. I was Brittany Meeks at West Point. I'm class of 2002. I apologize for my voice today. I'm beating a cold. I'm an MP officer by background, and as you can see, I'm still in uniform. I'm still active duty, and I'm currently the Indianapolis Army Recruiting Battalion Commander. So I have the active and reserve recruiting missions for almost all of Indiana and central and southern Illinois. I'm married to an Air Force Reserve Major. We'll hit 8 years of marriage this year, and we have 2 boys, Peter and Luke. They're 7 and 3, so I'm still in very much the young kid age, potty train and all that fun stuff. So that's its own resiliency sometimes. I've got a couple tours to Iraq when I was a younger officer, and then I also went to grad school and had a chance to teach at SOCH. And I've really been enjoying the Army recruiting world. It's given me an absolutely different perspective on something that the Army does and what's important in order to keep our ranks full so we can continue to be a strong and strategic force throughout the world. So that's just a little bit on me right now.
Thank you. And Bridgette.
Good afternoon. My name is Bridgette Bell, class of 2004. I am currently in the DC area. I'm doing the Army sabbatical program to get my PhD in clinical psychology. I'm AG by trade. I've been at Fort Bliss as my first duty station and a couple other places, big company command here in the DC area in what I call corporate Army. So a lot of resilient stories there. I have a 16-month-old. So in addition to working on my PhD and doing internship, I'm also, just like Brittany said, learning the motherhood resilience moment. And ultimately, I will go back to the Army next fall, back on active duty. finish my time in the HR world, retire, and then hopefully open my own practice, psychology practice.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'm impressed with you ladies. There's no question. Let's begin our discussion by talking about how you might define resilience. And I think I'll go backward this time. And Bridgette, how would you define resilience?
When I was teaching psychology back at BSNL, I went back to West Point 2013 and 2016 to teach engineering psychology. And so I think what I brought a little bit different to the classroom was every way that I explained things to the cadets was from a systems perspective. So under that same theme, I see resilience more of a process than an outcome, so to speak. So there's this constant system of inputs, there's processes that happen, and then there's outputs. So for example, there's your background that you bring to the table, the way you were raised, the things that you went through. And then there's really the everyday working that you do on yourself. And then ultimately, there's the outcome of that. What a lot of people may call post-traumatic growth in the psychology world can be a definite byproduct of resilience. And so I think my short answer is it's more of a system than an outcome. But there's a lot of parts to that system, and a lot of things that I'm sure we'll talk about here can relate to that.
Excellent. Bonnie, what are your thoughts on that?
So I was thinking a lot about resilience, not in terms of like bouncing back from difficulty, but enduring difficulty, because a lot of the situations that people may have to practice or demonstrate resilience through are maybe not going to improve. The situation itself may not improve. So it's just being able to endure with a positive mentality, maybe a difficult situation, and not let it, permanently harm you, but instead allow growth and something positive to result.
Okay, all right. Brittany, do you have any thoughts?
So as I thought about it, for me, I see it as like the ability to get back up again and regain that forward progress. So it's not just about getting back up again. It's at what point do we start moving forward? And that may not be immediate forward progress, because sometimes you have to heal. Sometimes you have to recover. Sometimes you have to figure out what's next because you didn't see what come and happened. But it's that forward progress as a goal at the end of that healing once you get knocked down. And I'd say it's, one of the questions you put to us is, how does that differ from grit and hardiness? And for me, it's really the movement forward. That's the real part forward, or for me, is I'm very future focused. And so if I can get back up again and start some of that move forward and take the good with me and the lessons from the bad, then to me, that's resiliency. It's what helps me continue, kind of like Bonnie said, to continue to persevere. Even when things are hard, there's something that can make me better. And every turn of that resiliency helps build that muscle, if you will, for the next experience that happens to help me get through it.
Well, I agree. Having studied leadership development, taught it, spoke on it for 20 some odd years, I like to think of resilience as not like bouncing back, but bouncing back stronger. From my own history, from those that I've worked with and coached in my executive coaching, I think the difficult things that one has to face, there's always a choice, right? Whether we want to get back up or how we're going to reframe what has happened to us to make us stronger. So my thought really falls in line with one of the authors that I really like is Bonnie St. John and her book, Micro Resilience, and the whole idea that you come back stronger. But there are things that you can do to make yourself more resilient. And we can talk about that a little later. So I think I think that all the definitions, there's no one definition, but I do think that that we're probably all saying it in slightly different ways. Because if it is a process, then there is a process of getting back up. There is a process of getting stronger and reframing how you saw a particular situation. But I think I also want to mention, if any of the people on the phone want to leave a question or answer that we can, a question that this panel can answer, please feel free. There's a way to do that. You won't be able to ask questions, but you certainly can put a comment in the chat box or the question and answer. So we'd love to hear from you as we go along, and I'll periodically check that. What I always love to hear, of course, I wrote a book called West Point Woman. So I always want to understand a little bit from your perspective, because you're so much younger than me, all you, is how do you believe that your West Point experience aided you potentially in developing your own resilience or your Army career? You can talk on either. So Bridgette, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can definitely attest to a part of what I went through at West Point that I'm sure a lot of people face is kind of that first dealing with grief on a very strong level. And so for me, my yearling year, one of my dear classmates passed away. He was on the football team, Anthony Miller, and he he had kind of ushered me through plebe swimming, which I was a two-time taker. And so when I was going through things first semester, he was always like there for me. And he passed away in February of our spring of our yearly year, and that was very hard. And then my godfather also passed away right after spring break of that year. And so for me, I think that was the first time that I realized not only am I on this path of learning and growing and becoming an officer, but I'm an actual human being at the same time. And so I had to figure out how to bounce back, both while I was there, you know, you was a classmate, you go through that whole process. But then leaving and going to my godfather's funeral, coming back, that stands out to me as probably the hardest time for me when I was a cadet. And if you add in, you know, being there when 9/11 happened, you add in being in the mess hall when that first casualty gets announced of a West Point graduate, it's like grief just became a theme. And I think for me, I learned that my support system matters. And if I go back to that system of growth I was talking about, like the inputs to that resilient system starts with your support. And if you don't allow people to be there for you, it can stunt that resilience process. And that was something that I had to learn during my yearling year from those two incidents.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brittany, you were there shortly at about the same time. In fact, you may have known one another. What are your thoughts on this?
So when I think of the West Point experience, for me, I think a lot of it was probably the first time I'd really encountered resistance from other people before. Like I'd encountered, you know, some personal resistance, or I'd had, you know, knee surgery when I was in high school. There were those things, but I'd never really encountered people that didn't necessarily support me. And so I think that was a growth thing for me. One, I had to find people that did. And so there was that, but I had to figure out how to not let those folks that didn't believe in me hold me back, and to still continue to try to go forward. And the first couple of years were hard with that, because I really didn't have those folks that necessarily believed in me at the level that I needed at peers and some of those, as far as like in my company. I did have it with some friends and some other organizations, the softball team, et cetera. But I really did have to learn personally, how could I continue to move that forward progress, continue to be who I knew I was, and grow in who I was, because there was definitely growth that needed to take place for me. And I started to see the fruit of that come around probably second semester of my Cal year, my summer of my first year, and really my first year itself. And so I think for me, it was really understanding that even though it's uncomfortable, doesn't mean that you just stop, but you keep pushing on. And when I did that, I learned a lot about myself. And it's been a long, you know, I mean, I think all of us are on a long self-awareness journey, but I also just realized I just had to keep going forward. And I learned that those things that made me uncomfortable were those very things I needed to go for, and doing those hard things helped make me better. And it was those repetitions that helped make each step going forward a little bit better, and at least a little bit more prepared to deal with the unknown.
How about you, Bonnie?
I would think my West Point experience made me very adaptable. If I think about starting our day as a high school graduate into this whole new environment, having to adapt to that environment and figure out how do I do this, and just also becoming a problem solver, new situations to tackle and work through. And so probably my most difficult time in my life was when I divorced after 20 years of marriage, and I had been a stay-at-home mom for a good number of years. And I was like, okay, well, and my ex-husband made a lot of money. We didn't need me to work. So, okay, I've got to adapt. I've got to figure out what am I going to do to support myself and be independent and not, destitute and crumble under this. It wasn't my choice that the marriage would end. But anyway, so I think just being able to drive on, something I learned at West Point, you just carry on. You don't have that option of just crumbling and letting life smother me, and so I think that was probably learned through those many moments in plebe beast barracks and plebe year, but then just military and West Point in general, just teaching you to just carry on and drive on and just make it through the circumstances that are challenging.
Yes. Of course, my experience was, I was in the 4th graduating class of women at West Point. So there, as I detail somewhat in my book, there were definitely people around us that did not want us there. I think it was probably prevalent still when you were there, Bonnie, probably. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I remember that I would call my father, and my father was very, let's say, for lack of a better word, he was cheap. Okay. So we couldn't talk a lot. He wouldn't, this is expensive, but he would say things like, well, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And at the time I'd be so mad, like, why are you saying that? That's not what I want to hear. I want you to tell me to quit and come home. But he never gave me like that out. And believe it or not, I think growing up with my father and mother, and realizing now that I've had years to think about this, that my dad and mom always showed resilience themselves. So I think some of those lessons were very, very early. And I knew my father had been a World War II hero. He had overcome, he had 4 Purple Hearts. He had a big scar down his leg. And so part of it was that he was telling me that I was going to make it. And somewhere along the line, in those years, I realized, I am going to make it. I'm going to hear what he had to say, despite what other people were trying to say about me. And I was very fortunate. I was on the cross country team and the track team and then the marathon team. So there were people that I did, as we've talked about, that need for a support system. But there was also something that occurred through the West Point experience in me, where you can push me down, but I'm going to get up. You're going to push me down, but I'm going to get up. And over, you had many opportunities to fail. I think some of the grieving personally was, I'm not as smart as I thought I was, and I'm going to be super challenged here. But because I kept at it, there was a confidence that built over time. And Bonnie, I could kind of relate to your story. I was very young when my first husband passed away, and all of a sudden I had the responsibility of 3 young girls. I was actually pregnant with my 3rd child, and at the time I had been out of the service for a while, but you know what? I gave myself orders to get through every day. So that all came back to what I learned at the academy. You got to get up. I mean, in the same week that I was looking at colors to paint the baby's room, I was looking at coffins. And I think the only way you can handle something like that was to for me, I gave myself orders. Well, you're going to go to the funeral home today and you're going to pick out that casket. And then the next day you're going to do this. And I think it was the ability to carry on, as you've all said, and to just keep at it, even though you're overwhelmed with, how am I going to redefine my life? How am I going to do the job of 2 people? How am I going to really restart my career, because I needed benefits? And it was, again, back to getting up, going, whether it was a lesson in plebe swimming, a lesson in the bayonet assault course, which was incredibly challenging for me, all those things kind of helped prepare me. And I didn't do things perfectly, and I wasn't successful all the time, and I'm still not successful in everything that I go after. But I do think that the West Point experience allowed me to problem solve the next thing I had to do. And maybe you all can identify with that, which I think is an important component of learning to be resilient. And sometimes you have bad days and sometimes you have good days, but the idea is that constant movement forward. At least that was my story. Can you share a story of overcoming you witnessed in others in your Army career? Anybody want to just take that question?
I can speak on that. Something that I've always admired within our network of West Point women is the ability to um, subliminally teach one another things. And so one of the when Bonnie and Brittany were talking, it actually reminded me of an incident that happened when I was a cadet. And I'll briefly share. My plebe year, we still had like football weekend guard and stuff back then. And this really old grad, he had to be 85, 90 years old. A lot of people had come up to me asking like for directions. How do you get to the stadium? How do you do this? I was like, Grant, turn around. But he walked up to me, got really close to my face, and he was like, you people weren't here when I was a cadet. And it was one of those like, is this really happening? Am I being punked? Like, this can't be real. And I'm from Mississippi originally, so that kind of stuff shouldn't have shocked me. But in that moment, it shocked me to my core. And my best friend since I was a cadet, even now, is Mary Tobin, that many of you probably know. And I remember going to her and being like, I can't believe this happened. And for 20 years, she's been that person that I can go to and be like, I can't believe this happened. How do I? And so I think in her resilience and things that she's gone through in the military, being medically retired, having many surgeries, donating a kidney to her mother, like she's taken everything that we were taught. Sorry. Sounds like a fire alarm. Speaking of resilience, I'm gonna mute and let someone else take this one while that. Oh wait, I guess it stopped.
Okay.
But I'll stop and say, just taking the things that we've learned, even from when we were plebes, and translating them into those everyday learning moments, and then being able to call someone and say, here's what I dealt with. Here's what I went through today on the job. How do you, what do you think about it? And how do I learn from it? She's just one of those people that I feel like I've had a million stories in terms of how she's kind of helped me see resilience outside of the military, but it's rooted in what we learned as officers.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Anybody else? Brittany.
So when I first looked at this question, there's a few things that popped to mind, and I could talk about some West Point ones, but one of the ones I think really stood out is when I was a platoon leader in Iraq, military police, we drove up and down the roads looking really slow, looking for bombs because there wasn't engineer route clearance at the time. And my platoon got hit with a lot of IEDs. Most thankfully, though, we didn't have a lot of injuries from it. But one day we did have an IED hit one of my vehicles, and the gunner actually took a little bit of shrapnel in the meaty part of the back of his neck. So thankfully it didn't cause any like significant damage or anything like that. He just had to get a little patched up. And they said they weren't going to even take it out, that it would just, work its way out on its own. And sure enough, he was at the barbershop one day and it just fell out. Right. But what was interesting about this experience is this was a very mediocre soldier. Like, he was timid in some things. He could do his job okay, but it's like he wasn't awesome. He wasn't gung ho. He just kind of did what he had to do and was told to do. But after that experience, like, it changed him, because he suddenly realized that his survival and the survival of his team, because this was an MP team, so one Humvee, was like dependent upon him as a gunner. And it turned him into this super soldier. Not that he was like, felt like he was invincible. He just took a different level of responsibility on himself when he went through that experience. And he began to build people up. He began to build himself up. And he just really became a fantastic soldier that was willing to take on the hard things, because he had persevered through a hard thing that at first we were worried it was going to destroy him because of who he was beforehand as a timid, really individual. but it did the opposite because of how he reacted to it. He took on that responsibility and really changed who he was. And now he got out of the military. He didn't keep an Army career, but now he's very much somebody that helps a lot of the veterans community. He helps reach out and provide that type of support because he's been there, done that. He's had several struggles since he's gotten out, but he always comes back. And I think a lot of it happens. He had this tough experience, and we'd had it happening all around, but once he had it happen to him, he made the choice that this was going to make him better, that he was going to give his team more, and that he was going to be more. And that really helped improve our platoon. And I saw that as just one of those moments of, one of my platoon members truly being resilient and having a lot of positive effects throughout the rest of the platoon, because a lot of people thought it would do him in. Instead, they were lifted up and encouraged by the strength and change that happened in him.
That's really cool. Excellent. Bonnie, do you have anything to add to this discussion, or?
Not for a military story. That was so long ago for me, and my memories have been replaced with more current memories. So I don't.
How about one of your patients that you've seen?
I've definitely seen resilience in individuals who, I guess the one that really sticks out to me is a man who had a stroke at a young age and had speech aphasia, so he couldn't get words out, but he had this incredible sense of humor, and his limited words he would use to tell like a joke or to make a funny comment. And I was just like very impressed that the frustration that he must experience not being able to speak, and yet to use those really few rare words to make a joke. It really showed a lot about his ability to bounce back, and really gave me like, I need to aspire to be more like that. So that's an example. And I think a sense of humor is really important when it comes to resilience, to be able to view things that could otherwise be just crushing as comical, and manage to make fun and lightheartedness out of difficult times.
Yes, I can't agree more. Yeah, because I served in the peacetime Army, nothing really comes to mind for that. But I did meet some amazing people because of being a West Point grad. I always joined a West Point society of some type wherever we lived. And after my first husband died, I got to know a man by the name of Paul Galante. Paul was a Naval Academy grad, but he was a POW from Vietnam. And I got to know him very well. And he became kind of a mentor to me. And he spent 7.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton, which means he was with Admiral Stockdale. So he, the prime of his life, really, he's in these awful conditions. That's when they use the TAP code and everything like that. But what it did for him toward the end of their incarceration, they actually could sit in rooms, and just to pass the time, because you can imagine how boring it was, they would have people that would teach chemistry, that would have them visualize like the periodic table on a wall, and then teach them things that way. Someone else would remember a movie, and then they would describe the movie from beginning, how the curtain opened, to the ending scene. And that experience for him was so enriching that when he got out and got his, medically taken care of, he was then at the Naval Academy, and he took all the courses in computer science that they offered at the time. I think this was in the early 80s, because he had an insatiable desire to learn. And he has been an incredible supporter of veterans. He was the Commissioner of Veterans Services for the state of Virginia for several years. But beyond that, he was a speaker, literally all over the country, encouraging people to look at things differently because of this incredibly harsh 7.5 years where he's taken from his wife. And so one of his sayings always gets me when I'm having a bad day, keeps me in perspective. And it was, "You're never having a bad day when you have a doorknob facing you." Because, he was locked away for so long. And it was always interesting to me that he was the eternal optimist. He says that often distinguished who survived really in those awful conditions. those that kept their hope and didn't die to hope when things were very, very difficult. And I think that is part of it. And some could be humor, but some could be that even though this is bad, I don't forget that there is a future. I will not, let's say a person is unemployed, or a person has had a severe loss, or they have a health challenge. Maybe it's not always going to be this way, and never losing the idea of hope and faith that things can work out. And I think that is part of a resilient person, that they learn those things. But until you're in those situations, I don't know as you are stretched that way. I mean, I certainly was stretched in my life that way. Each of you have different roles. From your perspective, what examples might you share about how resilience is shown in the people you currently work with and lead? Now, I know some of you are students, but I'll give you a little time to think about that. Maybe I'll ask Brittany first, because you've mentioned that you're in a different world. You're kind of in sales now. It's different than your other roles in the past, and your people are also probably dealing with different kind of situations. Could you comment on that at all?
Absolutely. So yeah, I can definitely say that recruiting has been, or is right now for me, the most challenging, complex leadership position I've been in. And when I really look at the recruiters, they live in a world of no. It is a world of rejection. They get told no so many more times than they get told yes. And I'm sure like anybody in the sales world is used to the same thing, but especially when you're trying to go out there and educate people on the Army and the opportunities when people don't know it, because that's a big challenge here in the Midwest. But it is absolutely a world of no. And so the ones that do well are the ones that see every no as a step closer to the yes. And so it doesn't get them down, but instead it's like, all right, I got to know. That means I'm one step closer to my next yes. And they continually see that obstacle as something to get over in order to achieve versus something to stop them. And so the ones that are really effective do that. And it's hard out here because we're taking people, soldiers from the force, we're bringing them out to recruiting, and they get 6 weeks of training. That's it on how to do this. And yet we bring them out here, and you've got the pressure of numbers. And unlike what they've probably been dealing with in ForceCom is there's not really somebody telling them everything that they have to do every minute of every day. So it really requires for a lot of really young NCOs, sometimes young, E5 sergeants, to be very responsible for their personal time and their personal work ethic, because their time is their most valuable, valuable resource. They can't get it back. They've got to go spend it well and be efficient at what they're doing in order to get to that yes. And so it is a very, very challenging environment where it's not something that they've been trained to do. It's not something that they really understand. And so to come out here and be able to do well at it, or even just to meet the basic standard at it, requires a lot of individual responsibility and willingness to get past the no's, knowing that there's a yes on the other side. And so as leaders, we really have to work hard to help provide extra wins, to provide them the right way to get to that yes, because otherwise it is a job that can beat you down if you don't look at it through the right lens.
Excellent. How about you, Bridgette?
So I would say working with my clients is very similar to the work that I did in the Army, specifically when I was a company commander. As I said, I was here in the DC area as a commander, and for 22 months, I had someone on suicide watch every day. I was in what a lot of people would consider a medical or admin hold company. So in the whole DC area, if you got in trouble and you were released from the White House or DIA or one of those three-letter organizations, pretty much anyone who wasn't in the Pentagon, which is a lot of people, a couple thousand people, they fell under my command. And so they would come to us if they couldn't do their job anymore for legal reasons or medical reasons. I had HIV positive soldiers. And so much about what I see working with clients now, both in a private practice and at a university counseling center, is so close to what I did when I was a commander. Just helping push people forward on that day to day. Like Brittany said, getting the no every day. Imagine if your whole life is a big no right now and you're in limbo, you don't really know how to get through. It's not too dissimilar from what we see with clients going to treatment. So it's hard to make that decision to go to counseling. It's hard to accept the diagnosis. And I've worked with a lot of people with very hard to treat diagnoses. And so one of the things that I'll just say is just showing up. So my clients motivate me, encourage me to continue this work because of the ones that show up, even when they're in a very depressive state or they're manic or you know, so much going on. To continue to come to treatment, whether it's weekly, every other day, whatever it is, it's a very motivating thing to watch. Even if you don't see the outcome on a regular basis, the improvement, just them showing up matters. And I think for as a leader, you know, we know what it's like to help push that soldier through. It's a whole different ballgame when you're in a clinician client role. But I'm taking a lot of what I learned from command and helping my clients just stay motivated to continue to show up.
Lottie, do you have anything to add to this discussion?
Sure. I think Bridget and I kind of are in similar fields or working towards similar fields. The people that I've seen really do well demonstrating resilience, I feel like have had some sort of a faith foundation that helps not view difficulties as either punitive or long lasting, but that there's some ultimate positive purpose in it. Like if people are able to see something beyond their current suffering, then it gives some hope. Also, I've mentioned the sense of humor I've seen to be a good indicator of resilience, but also gratitude. I think when people can identify even small things that are positive in light of other difficult circumstances, I mean, it really does help to have some balance between the difficult circumstance and other positive things that you may not notice. But that can't come from me telling them what is positive or what isn't. It really has to be where they're at in their struggle and in their journey. And so I think, kind of as Bridget mentioned, like being able to walk alongside somebody going through something tough, they can't hear how they should feel from another person. Like they have to be able to feel their emotion and deal with their emotion in their own time, in their own, you know, in the timing or in the intensity that is going to work for them. But having another person on the outside tell them how to feel or how to believe or how to think doesn't really work initially. They've got to have that. It has to come from within.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we actually have a question that I wanted to see if Bonnie or Bridget might be able to answer. And the question is, any suggestions on resilience in dealing, whoops, it's gone. Whoops. Any suggestions on resilience in dealing with somebody with depression, resilience for the loved one trying unsuccessfully to help? We want to give an answer to that.
I went ahead and typed something because I didn't want to miss the opportunity if we ran out of time. But self-care is really important. If you Google caring for a partner with depression or PTSD, there's a lot of websites that will give you a lot of good feedback. But as Bonnie, I'm sure knows, self-care is so important. And often the caregiver puts their needs second, which is a very selfless thing to do. But over time, it can just take a toll on you. When I left command, my health broke down and the doctors told me I had lupus, which was a misdiagnosis, thank God. But it was because I was on this heightened level of stress for so long that I never took care of myself. And so I'm a personal witness to what that can do to a person. I would just say whatever steps you can take, like support groups are good. Therapy for families is just as important for therapy for that individual. And then not taking things personally. So a lot of people with depressive symptoms, they isolate and we take that as, oh, it's me, and not that this is how they cope. And so there's just a lot of help out there. It's great that the question is being asked because there are a lot of people who deal with this.
Yes, I think caregivers often have the most difficult time, the most challenging time, because they may feel overly responsible. But yes, taking care of yourself. Bonnie, do you have some thoughts on that as well?
Just to understand really clear boundaries of what do you have responsibility for and what do you not have responsibility for. So your loved one's mental health is not your responsibility. You might really hurt seeing them struggle. You might really feel like you should be able to make a difference. But I love the saying, don't shit on yourself, okay? You can't, like, those shoulds are going to drive you crazy. So really being able to walk away and say, I care about this person, and at the same time, there's nothing I can personally do to safeguard their mental health. And if the ultimate tragic outcome of they take their own life, like, that still would not be your responsibility. So being able to just insulate yourself from that self-blame is really important, to being able then to be a support to them and meet them where they're at, and be able to really support them instead of have a lot of inward and self-blame about what's going on with them.
Absolutely. I wanted to switch a little bit up and talk about what can happen sometimes, at least it has in my life. If I was to ask you, panelists, how most people perceive you, are you thought of as a resilient woman? And if so, how does that expectation impact you? Brittany, you want to take that one?
So I've actually had some interesting conversations with some peers and even some of my subordinates lately, kind of along this lines, is that yes, I am seen as a strong woman, resilient, able to handle a lot. And interestingly enough, I'm much more able to have open conversations and be a little bit more vulnerable in the workplace, and make sure that I have, because I feel like it's my responsibility to also model good self-care, that I do that well in the workplace to make sure that I carve out time for my family and I help others do the same thing. But I'm not good at it at home. Like I feel like when I get home, like, my family needs me to be strong for them. They don't need the burdens of work. And so it's like I'm the opposite when I go home. I try to be, not project any of that on my kids or my husband. And so sometimes I'm probably not as vulnerable as I should be. And it's really been an area that I'm wrestling with, because there's stuff that I do need to share. And especially with bouncing around between duty stations like I have been. And I mean, you guys know, the higher you go up in rank, the less people there are around you. Well, I really haven't had any peers around me for probably about 4 years now, because I was at Army Human Resources Command and sort of some much more civilian-driven locations or positions versus with officers. And so I haven't had that good friend group. Here, I've thankfully been able to, for the first time, plug into a good church for a long time, and find some good professional women that I'm starting to develop some of those relationships with, because I do need a way outside of work to be able to take self-care, because resilience, I think, they just both hit on some really good points about self-care. And like I said, I feel like I model it good at work, but I don't actually execute it good at home. So it is a tough area for me that I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah. Anybody else? Bridgette?
I know we had talked about this briefly before, but absolutely, when you make certain decisions to challenge yourself, people see you as a giant force to be reckoned with, and sometimes forget that you're human. And so I think similar to what Brittany said, I learned very early on to preach that at work. But as I shared before, when I got sick, I wasn't modeling it for myself. And so being a strong woman became this like theme that you never knew how to turn it off. And so I think what I've learned is, as I've become a mom recently, that the only person who really needs to see me as a strong person is my daughter. Everyone else can take a little bit of the moments where I'm not as strong as I maybe put off into the world, because the people who care and accept me will know that I am also human. And so one of the things that I'm challenging myself to do is, when I go back to active duty, is to live that authentically, to plug into the support systems. Like Brittany said, when you move as much as we do, and I did my time at HRC as well, and I thought going out there, I was going to get plugged in, and I was just working so much, there was never time. And then I just bounced. It's like I was moving every 18 months to 24 months after that. And going back to West Point as a single woman, no children, not normal. So then people look at you like, it's just you? What do you mean? And so I've learned to own the strong me that I am, but also learn when it's appropriate to be vulnerable. And so I appreciate this panel because it just reinforces what I think the shift in my system that I'm trying to make is balancing that a lot better than I have in the past.
Bonnie, any thoughts?
Not a whole lot. I do also feel the same struggle between being perceived as strong and capable and then being authentically vulnerable, which, you know, as a human being, I have moments of weakness, of vulnerability. And so being discerning about who is safe to share that with and who isn't, it's hard. There's always situations and examples of making a poor choice, of sharing with, you know, being vulnerable in a situation where that backfires. So I'm there with you guys where it's a journey and it's a struggle, and something worth going through.
Right. I think I could probably talk a lot about on this subject. One example was after my first husband died. I remember my father-in-law, who recently passed away, but this was years ago. He would always tell me that he would be talking to people. They'd ask how I was doing, where he was working, and he would say, well, you know, Sarah's a West Pointer. And, you know, she is doing a wonderful job. And I think he was saying it to kind of encourage me, but in another way, it was a way that put me in a situation where I couldn't ask for help, maybe. That it was a way that he was saying, she's going to be fine. We don't have to worry about her anymore. Anyone who's ever gone through loss, you know, it can be years before you really do just incorporate that loss into your life. And, but I even carried over that. And it was finally a good psychotherapist that helped me see that my children would do better if they knew that I struggled at times, that I didn't have to be this towering power of strength, that they actually learn things when I say, I really need your help with this. I can't handle all the work that needs to be done to run a household. And I need you to help me and support me in this. And I think it was a process of getting to the point that you can be authentic. And what I've always discovered, if I had a strong support system, and it took me a while to find a good, strong support system and to cultivate it and to spend time with those people, I was always healthier. No matter what I was going through, if I have the support system, and it did come out of my church mostly, that these were solid people that were there despite the ups and downs of life and would encourage me, pray for me, you know, help me out occasionally, then I was able to handle the next difficulty that was coming along. And I think that for me was part of the self-care. You know, that someone would say, let's just go grab a cup of coffee, or we're going to do a girls' weekend, and you could get refreshed and all those kind of things. So I think that was, so I would not have that pressure of always being like, she's just going to handle it all. She's just going to handle it all. And I think we have to fight against that a little bit and take the risk of being, well, maybe she doesn't have everything together. Well, good. You know, as the longer I've lived, very few people have it all together. Any suggestions as we start to run out of time? It doesn't look like we have any more questions on how people can develop resilience. What do you do to develop your own resilience and maintain it? Anything that we haven't discussed up to this point? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I'd like to just say reflecting on past successes is so important, and it's hard to do when you're in the middle of a situation that feels tough. You know, journaling, when I can see in my own hand, my own words, then it means a little bit more to me than, I mean, I don't know, for me that works, is writing, even if it's writing out emotional, you know, lows, Well, when I relook at it, I'm not there anymore. Or again, the past victories or the past successes, reflecting on that in my own handwriting makes a big difference to me.
Very nice. Very good.
One of the things I think has helped me is I was no PT stud when I was at West Point. In fact, it was pretty intimidating to me, some of the stuff. But since then, it's like I got over some mental hurdles, and I found running marathons and trained for Ironmans and doing triathlon, and just I've done some of the different CrossFit stuff. And I'm no elite athlete by any way, stretch or means, but choosing to do those hard things that were for me, that were fun, became a great outlet. And it helped me overcome and find that there was things that I could do that I didn't even know I could do, but finding those challenges. So for me, it was physical fitness stuff. I have other friends that will take on new hobbies and try new things to master something new, that by doing those things, that can be part of that self-care, but it also helps make you stronger because you're doing something you've never done before. You're pushing those boundaries, you're doing hard things, and those hard things help make you stronger. So it's like for me, I did the triathlon stuff after I'd been to Iraq. And so on the tough days of training, I'd be like, well, I'm not getting shot at or blown up. It's a great day. And so like that past resiliency helped me get through that. And then when I've done other things, I'm like, well, this isn't as hard as an Ironman. I'm good to go. And so it kind of gives you some frames of reference to use in life, those positive things that Bonnie just mentioned, those successes to build upon. But I think you have to try to find those hard things. You stay in your comfort zone, you're going to be comfortable, and you're not going to get necessarily stronger. But you can move to different zones as you push to do those hard things.
I really like both of those. I was taking mental notes. I think what I would add to that is just trying to gain a firm footing in your identity. Being a woman of color, I think for me that's even more important in certain settings within the military, where I've never worked for a Black woman before, and been able to really get that type of mentorship directly in the office. So I've had to seek it oftentimes, and I've learned that my mentors don't have to look like me. And so I think that being able to kind of plant your resilience tree means really understanding yourself better, figuring out which part of your identity speaks to you the most, whether it's being a mother or being a woman, being a West Pointer. Like, we all have all these different layers to our identity. And sometimes getting rooted in that, like some of us have talked about religion and different teams we've been on, getting rooted in that identity contributes to your ability to establish your support system, go through things, and then grow. And I think for me, I've just learned in the last few years just how much more important that is. And it's something that you have to take the time to do, which, like everyone said, setting out time for these things is invaluable. But there's just so many different ways to explore your identity. Family history is one way that I've really kind of clung to. And I think we all have to try to figure out which parts of our identity we want to work on the most as a part of that process. You're rooted in one part, but maybe you want to work on some other part and grow that part of you, similar to what Brittany said about training for a marathon. Like, it's a process, and it takes a lot of work. But I think that's one piece that we don't give enough time to as we're growing up, because we're so focused on getting to the next thing.
Yeah, exactly. I would also reiterate that same idea too. Another great book I loved was Angela Duckworth's Grit. And I love, she even studied West Point cadets. So y'all got to buy this book. It's phenomenal. But one of the things she does with her own family is everybody, including her children, always have to do one difficult thing and stick with it. So she talked, I think, in the book about one daughter taking violin. And of course, that's a hard instrument to learn how to play, but she had to stay with it for at least a year. So there was no getting out of it. And I think having those kind of challenges is good. But I also like the idea that Bonnie St. John promotes in micro-resilience, because there's little things that we can do throughout our day to increase our resilience. They do a comparison in this book of the idea that great tennis players, the only distinguishing difference is the little things that they did, like how they decreased their breath, their heart rate in between shots. And that's where she kind of focuses her effort in this book to talk about little things you can do, like hydrating throughout the day. it doesn't sound like that would be something huge, but drinking 64 ounces of water a day actually does great things for your body, and your mind are connected in such a way. But the deep breathing exercises that you can do throughout the day, and I've taught emotional intelligence for 10, 15 years now, and those kind of little techniques throughout the day will actually allow you to be resilient throughout your day. But most of us stay hyped, stay under stress all day long, and then we're exhausted, and then we're exhausted by the weekend. So some people will do that by, let's watch a bunch of Netflix, which isn't building our resilience, but it's the little things. It's the little things that we can do. And she does talk about capturing your emotions throughout the day, really naming them. That is a sense of journaling, but also knowing what sets you off and what calms you is incredibly important, so you can kind of prepare for those difficult things that are part and parcel of your day. A lot of us go through a day just kind of taking it, and we wonder why we're exhausted. So I would recommend that book as well. Well, I wanted to see if there are any more questions from our audience. Is there anything else that you all would like to hear about? Certainly put it in the chat box. I'm just going to check here if there's anything at all. While we're waiting to see if anybody is thinking, wants to put something in there. Anybody have any final words, final thoughts or advice that they'd like to share? Bridgette?
Yeah, I would encourage not just those who were still in uniform in any component, but anyone to really try to tap into the Army's Master Resilience Trainer information that's out there. I did go to the course down at Fort Jackson, and it was great. It is based on UPenn's positive psychology, and so I think oftentimes some people, when it first came out, didn't understand the value. The Army did a really good job of creating a common language for resilience. And so anyone who's interested in reading on just some of the skills that they teach, some of the questionnaires that are available to give you individual feedback on the things that you do as a part of your resilience, I would highly encourage any listener to tap into those resources and take the class if possible.
Bonnie, any last words?
No, but just, we've all been through hard things, and we'll continue to have to deal with hard things, and just hang in there and keep going. That's all you can do some days, and it will get better in most cases. It'll be a distant memory at some point.
Yeah, I sometimes say, I say a Jody, like little hill, no sweat. That's what I'll say to myself. I don't know if you guys ever say a cadence, but sometimes I have to do that depending on what I'm working with at that time. How about you, Brittany?
I think just sharing stories like with each other. I appreciate this group because we do have a common background, and then that has helped spur a variety of, a multitude of different experiences. And I think the more we share stories with each other and really support each other and lift each other up, that builds resilience too. Knowing that other people have been through hard things and made it through, I think is super important. So whether it's this group of West Point women, or it's, some professional women in your area that you can find that you can, talk to, we all need the ability to share with each other our stories and be there to lift each other up when we're down and to cheer each other on when we're up.
That's right. Wow. All great words. My last message to all those on the phone is thank you for joining us. Thank you for your question, and take good care of yourself. Remember, self-care is part and parcel with being resilient, and we wish you all great success. Thank you to my panelists. It's been a great hour of time together, and thank you again for sharing your hearts, sharing your minds, your wisdom, and we hope that you enjoyed this. And you all have a great afternoon.